The orderly tries to imagine the age in which Old Man Perkins was forced to endure 1930s America. A time before the bomb, before the computer, before the jet, before America became a global empire. The evil empire. How times have indeed changed for everyone. Everyone except blacks. For the rapidly diminishing black populace, life in the 21st century appears very much like 1930s Mississippi, despite having a so-called black president. A white man in blackface, young Perkins thinks to himself. How lacking of courage, of grit. How the mulatto cringed when asked to stand up for his people, to speak out on behalf of their suffering. What good? What good would voting do? How cruelly the blacks living in the 21st century had been betrayed, bamboozled. The young orderly gingerly strokes the old man's head. He imagines himself in that very same bed, perhaps 60 or even 70 years later. How would he find his people? What would the world be like? How would the condition of the black man have changed? Would there be any truly black people left? Would the ever-increasing pogrom of the black race continue? Would new man-made viruses accomplish its genocidal goal? Or would it be a slow death brought about by unjust laws? Laws designed specifically to deprive blacks of the right to vote. As if voting would do any good. From the young attendant's perspective, the majority of blacks in political office were out to enrich themselves. They told the people what they wanted to hear, not what they needed to hear. Tickling their ears instead of empowering or enlightening them. They were a collection of swindlers, buffoons, brainwashed by constant bombardment by the media, programmed to worship white culture. They were force-fed, glutted on all the false values offered by an empty and soulless society. But above all, standing at the apex, the very pinnacle of Everest, there, exalted at its tip, was what meant all, absolutely all, that being the white woman. Like the whore of Babylon, white America demanded she be worshipped. Back then in Mr. Perkins' time, a time of Uncle Tom's minstrel shows and Coon and Coons, interracial relationships were strictly taboo, forbidden. Back then, the black man was forced to look for the beauty that shined within his own people, his own women. In those days, a black man had to search deep within himself to find the beauty that God himself had placed within him. The tight grip of Old Man Perkins forces the young orderly from his state of deep introspection. After giving the old man another sip of cold water from the cup, Mr. Perkins continues speaking, describing the unfavorable characteristics of the various residents of Muskie. He spoke of the deputy, Darrell, Bubba. He spoke of Kevin, Pastor Jackson, and Miss Hazel. He spoke lovingly of his grandmother, Miss Emma. But as soon as the room is suddenly lit up by a blinding flash of lightning, followed by a deafening peal of thunder, the old man began speaking in an affrighted whisper. The young orderly grew tense at the sight of the old man, trembling in fear. Not an ordinary fear, but a cold, stark terror. His memory seemed to torture him, forcing him to recall, to relive the night he and Kevin had followed the mysterious Mr. Pickman. It was the night before Christmas Eve. The church was having a late-night prayer meeting. It was to last from 10 to midnight. All the adults in the community were in attendance. For Mount Olive First Missionary Baptist Church of Muskie, it was an annual ritual, something that had been practiced by the Negroes of the community since the founding of the church back in the 1880s. Young Perkins and Kevin had agreed ahead of time to meet at the crossroads at the stroke of 10. Kevin reassuring Perkins that his sisters would at that time be fast asleep, leaving them free to trail the mysterious Mr. Pickman, who had been seen in the late hours walking in the direction of the swamps. The haunted swamps. The swamps of the dead. Pickman was seen taking the narrow path that led in the direction of old Granny Hagen, the conjure woman's shack. The glow of a gibbous moon threw an eerie light on the crossroads of Colored Town as the figures of two young men furtively approached. "Right on time," young Perkins says with a smile of self-satisfaction. "Right on time," replies Kevin with a self-satisfied smile. "Are you ready?" "Ready," replies young Perkins. Whereupon the two young men take position in the high weeds that line the road. Their waiting is not in vain, for soon another figure appears, clad in a black robe, a hooded robe in fact, was none other than the mysterious Mr. Pickman. He walks in a steady, determined pace, passing the crossroads. He was indeed headed in the direction of the swamps. In his hand he carried a thickly bound book, the same book he had to read from that night at the cemetery, the night in which they had narrowly escaped the wrath of the Thing. "Did you see that?" young Perkins questions his companion. Swallowing hard, Kevin replies with a, yeah. Nervously looking around, Kevin's hands began to tremble. With eyes reflecting a level of anxiety, he seeks reassurance. "Are you sure? I mean, I ain't scared, but is you sure you want to do this?" Young Perkins is amused by Kevin's timidity. Perkins attempts to stop, to lighten the mood by saying, "Sure, man, come on now. Ain't you curious? Don't you want to see what he been up to?" Once more swallowing hard, Kevin nods his head in agreement. Inhaling deeply, Kevin gathers in the crisp winter night's air, filling his lungs to capacity with life-giving oxygen. Renewing himself with courage, he then exhales, dispelling all fear, purging himself of all anxiety. Thus liberated from the bonds of cowardice, no longer apprehensive, Kevin nods his head in the affirmative. The bold expression on his face denotes a determined assurance. Beneath the light of a winter's moon, with the night's chill prickling their skin like thousands of tiny needles, young Perkins is proud of his companion, extremely impressed by Kevin, who looks, somehow, noble. There's something regal, something royal about him. He reflects an inner strength he had never seen before. Not in Booker, not in Jojo, not even in the school bully who, you might say, ruled the roost. Young Perkins hadn't seen that level of faithful assurance in any colored boy. Though it is fair to say that Pastor Jackson did possess a certain spiritual power. He was indeed a man of courage, of conviction, but damn, Kevin had grit, true grit. Young Perkins thought to himself, hell, tonight I'd follow you through the gates of hell. Unbeknownst to him, that is exactly where the road would lead. At approximately 10:25 p.m. on the night of December 23rd, 1932, in the county of Muskie, in the state of Mississippi, two colored boys were about to experience that which no one on earth would be called to endure. As Mr. Pickman continued in the direction of the haunted swamps, the swamps of the dead, he had no inkling that he was being followed, trailed, stealthily shadowed, watched by curious eyes, his every movement inquisitively observed. As the trees began to grow thick around them, the two boys continued to follow, always keeping Mr. Pickman under constant observation. But as the mysterious figure continued on his way, Kevin and young Perkins began to notice a difference in the trees. There was a death-like quality about them. Moss-covered branches with limbs hideously contorted mimed agonized poses, horribly resembling the half-starved arms and legs of tortured men. Men with rotted hands, hands with painfully arthritic fingers, cadaverous hands, the hanging molds having the unnerving appearance of necrotic flesh. Kevin, as brave as ever, remained unaffected, even as every tree seemed covered with a thick, swampish slime. The dead, dying moss dangling down like long strips of greenish purple flesh. As they continued tracking the mysterious robed figure, the high weeds grew taller, increasing in density, the firm soil beneath their feet gradually turning into mire. The change in their surroundings became more profound as a heavy mist began to rise. The narrow road turned into a thin trail as a ghostly miasma rose from the boiling bog pits. How grotesque the surroundings. There were no sounds of nature, no frogs croaking, no crickets chirping. Through the graveyard silence, all that was heard was the footsteps of the hooded figure of Mr. Pickman, and that god-awful sound. The hissing, the bubbling sound of gases slowly escaping from the surrounding mud. Young Perkins wished that he had waxed stuffed ears as Ulysses' men had. God in heaven, what fools they were! It chilled the blood, turned the stomach, to hear the constant emissions from the deadly pits of quicksand. Dear God, how it burped and bubbled, belching forth a revolting miasma. The hot steam rising from the sulfur pits resembled open mouths, breathing, bubbling like a witch's cauldron. A cauldron of death, a crucible of horrors. Still, they continued. Sometimes a misstep sent them sinking knee-deep into the bubbling mire. At one time, a diamondback rattler came within striking distance. Undaunted, the young men continued on, always keeping the mysterious figure within view. Tonight's surveillance of Mr. Pickman was different than their previous tailing of him to
Pottersfield. Although he traveled in the same secretive manner, tonight seemed different. Now they found themselves deep within the heart of that malevolent realm. A strange world of phantasmagoria, there within the living, breathing swamps. The swamps of the dead was heard a distant moan. A faint and lonely moan, as if someone were in pain. Its reverberations echoing just above the sound of the bubbling sulfur pits. The sound of the distant moan was joined by the sound of a woman weeping, it also seeming to emanate from everywhere. It lurked within every shadow, from the highest branches of moss-covered trees down to the boiling pits around them. It came from nowhere and everywhere. Now Kevin began to show his mortality. His face no longer exuded confidence. Kevin's bravado swiftly fled away. His face began to reflect a fearful unease. A feeling that young Perkins had felt all along but had the inner resolve to mask. Then they saw the thing that few had seen and lived to tell. The thing that made them stop dead in their tracks. A sight that made them freeze in place, rooted to the ground. The two young men gazed affrightedly, staring in cold, stark terror at the thing that sent them cowering in fear. They cringed, their basic instincts causing the foolish young adventurers to simultaneously crouch, to grow small, to hide themselves among the tall weeds. For that thing that gripped and held them so, dear Christ, was the spectral image afloat just above ground. It would be the first of what would be a veritable saraband of spectral wanderers. It was one of the lost souls, the souls of those who had been claimed by the swamp, souls of runaway slaves that had perhaps taken a misstep and found themselves trapped within the miry pits to be sucked down and forever forgotten. It was one of the blind dead, the legend that Mr. Grimes had described.